Scripture today in the lectionary comes, this is from the Old Testament, in Genesis in the 16th chapter. Now Sarah, Abraham's wife, bore him no children. She had an Egyptian slave girl whose name was Hagar. And Sarah said to Abraham, "You see that the Lord has prevented me from bearing children, so go into my slave girl. It may be that I shall obtain children by her." And Abraham listened to the voice of Sarah. So after Abraham had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarah, Abraham's wife, took Hagar, the Egyptian, her slave girl, and gave her to her husband Abraham as a wife. He went in to Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, she looked with contempt on her mistress. Then Sarah said to Abraham, "May the wrong done to me be done on you. I gave my slave girl to your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked on me with contempt. May the Lord judge between you and me." But Abraham said to Sarah, "Your slave girl is in your power. Do to her as you please." Sarah dealt harshly with her, and she ran away. The angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, by the spring on the way to Shur. And he said, "Hagar, slave girl of Sarah, where have you come from, and where are you going?" She said, "I am running away from my mistress, Sarah." The angel of the Lord said to her, "Return to your mistress and submit to her." The angel of the Lord also said to her, "I will so greatly multiply your offspring that they cannot be counted for multitude." And the angel of the Lord said to her, "Now you have conceived and shall bear a son, and you shall name him Ishmael. For the Lord has given heed to your affliction. He shall be a wild ass of a man, with his hands against everyone, and everyone's hands against him. And he shall live at odds with all his kin." So she named the Lord who spoke to her, "You are Elroy." For she said, Have I really seen God and remained alive after seeing him?" Therefore the well was called Be'er al-Hai-Roi. It lies between Kadesh and Bered. Hagar bore Abraham a son, and Abraham named his son, whom Hagar had bore him, Ishmael. Abraham was 86 years old, and Hagar bore him Ishmael. This is the wisdom of God. Sometime this past month, the women had a meeting, and they started the meeting with a devotion because it was around Mother's Day, so the devotion was Mothers of the Bible. And of course there was Mary, and then there was Elizabeth, the mother of John the Baptist, and then there's Rebecca, Sarah, Rachel, all of those mothers. And I stopped in the middle of it, and in my mind I said, what about Naomi? Y'all know Naomi and Ruth. She's one of my favorites. And then I thought again, I said, what about Hagar? Isn't she a mother in the Bible? She's a slave. Significantly, she is a slave of Sarah. She was not the legitimate receiver of the designated sperm of Abraham. That was Sarah, but she was barren. Don't you love that word? I mean, try and use that with somebody today who doesn't have children. You're barren. But for that time, it meant something, because if you were not able to have children, you were barren and you were not very much worth. Have we read this story? How many of you have read this story? Have you read this story before? A few of you know the story. Who's the main character? Is it Abraham? Sarah? Or is it Hagar? The slave, barren slave. The story starts with Sarah being upset that she is barren. She decides to put things into motion for herself so she can have children. And she thinks, I have a slave over here, Hagar. And maybe Abraham can have a child by Hagar. And since she's a slave, it would be Abraham's child. And therefore be my child too. That's what she's thinking. And here's the key. Hagar can have a child, but it is not hers, after all. Abraham's demeanor in this story is basically ambivalent. He is programmed to say, whenever Sarah says anything to him, he's programmed to say, whatever. Have sex with your slave, whatever. A typical man, but even worse in that time, men had nothing to do with child rearing after an initial effort. Then when Hagar becomes pregnant, Sarah immediately becomes jealous and angry. And in the message, here's the next exchange between Abraham and Sarah. Sarah says, it's all your fault that I'm suffering this abuse. I put my maid in bed with you, and the minute she knows she's pregnant, she treats me like nothing. Abraham's response, you decide. She's your business. In other words, whatever. Both of these great patriarchs, matriarchs of our faith are acting pretty juvenile in this story. Can we hear how Abraham is apathetic and uncaring, and Sarah is caring? No, she's not caring. She doesn't care about anybody but herself in this story. Sarah treated Hagar badly. Eugene Peterson in the Messages used the word abused. Let's not underscore what this would have been like for a slave with no power, no place, no connection, only servitude, no status. Sarah could have killed her and the child. That would have been fine. So Hagar runs away. Hagar's in the wilderness. Let's understand here that means the desert. She was by the spring of Shur when the angel came to her. She has essentially decided to end her and her child's life in the wilderness with no connection and no support. Then the angel tells her to go back to Sarah and put up with her abuse, and says that if she goes back to Sarah to be abused, her son will become an ass of a man. Fortunately, Eugene Peterson changed that into a bucking bronco of a man. That's the literal thing it says in the New Revised Standard, an ass of a man. He will be a fighter. He will be troublesome. His name will be Ishmael, and he will be the ancestor of great people. Hold on. I thought this whole Bible story was about Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, and it kind of goes Jacob, and it goes from there. What's this? What's this? The story continues in chapter 21, when Sarah is displeased with Isaac, that Isaac is out playing with Ishmael. When Sarah sees this, she says to Abraham, cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not inherit along with my son Isaac. Jealous, impulsive, insensitive, lacking in compassion? Maybe. And what does Aaron say about that? Do what she will, for she is your business. And then says, God will make a nation of him also. They are cast out. Abraham apparently has little choice but to obey his wife. Does that ever happen, that you have little choice but to obey your wife? Abraham is given a skin of water, gives her a skin of water. And then when the water runs out, she takes Ishmael about a stone's throw away, puts him down, and goes way over here because she doesn't want to watch him die. And and she wept. Who are we sympathizing with in this story so far? Indifferent, conceited Abraham, jealous and manipulative Sarah, or the woman who's in the desert weeping? Heroes in the Bible are not perfect. They're quite imperfect. On the surface, this could be a parable of compassion. Abraham and Sarah have none. God and the angels do. When one has power like Abraham, one can become indifferent, arrogant, and uncaring. I would say to say whatever to everything is a luxury. When one is mean and manipulating like Sarah, one is not on the way of God. And as we must know, the story goes deeper in that God seems to be siding with this poor, dependent slave woman and a foreigner, and not with Isaac. I want to think of another possible meaning too. I think it's better to be a good slave than a bad patriarch. Isn't it better to be good and poor than wealthy and powerful? Why don't we talk about goodness today? I hardly ever hear about goodness. When we consider what we want to do with our lives, material things, Apple 14's out, success of some kind, becoming popular and known. When we think of our children and what we want for them, what do we want for them? Notoriety? I think the thing we say the most is happiness. But what is that? What I want to know is, when we think about child rearing, do we think about making good people? Virtuous, having integrity, being kind and decent. Is it better to be financially secure and selfish, or a poor person who cares for other people? Our society says the former person is a success and the latter person is a loser. One time, a person in this church came to my office and she was upset about Kenneth. She was crying and she said, "He was such a good human being." When I became a parent, I wanted my children to be good people above all. Humble, kind, honest, and giving, rather than resentful and controlling. I'm very proud of my children. I believe I was a good dad. And I believe I raised good men. Not always cool, not necessarily successful in the world's eyes, not great, but good men. And it's very difficult in a competitive culture. My boys are very different. Kenneth was on the stage to change the world. Sometimes I would tell people he was a 4-point, and then I'd say, wait a minute, there were those 2 B's in 9th grade. But that's not what I really said. That's not who he was. Yeah, he was a 4-point. But what is he? He was a wonderful, good person. Open, caring, kind, compassionate. People surrounded him. Aaron, on the other hand, will never be famous. But he will change lives, like he already has. I can tell you of 2 incidences in which he literally saved 2 young people's lives. Since it's Father's Day, I attribute a lot of this to having 2 wonderful grandfathers. 2 wonderful grandfathers who loved them, a pastor and a professor. There's another side or underside to this. If we are not trying very hard and prioritizing raising our children to be good people, how will there be good people in the world? Culture has become so narcissistic. Many people don't even see others, much less offer them kindness. Can you imagine desiring for our politicians to be good people? Doesn't seem so. I know we see bribery, extortion, habitual lying, threats of violence, greed, name-calling, and most of all, willful ignorance. Is this what we want of the people in our country? Are these the people that everybody's supposed to follow? We want those who teach us to be the best, the most knowledgeable, the one with the best academic reputation. But if that person teaches like Cocaine Bear, is it worth it? Or do we want somebody who's a good person, who teaches and funnels learning through compassion? Do I want the world to think anything of me that I'm great at? Or do I want people to know that I lived with integrity and tried to listen? I do not understand. I will never understand how people can be so infatuated with a person who is obviously a bad man. Donald Trump is a bad man, plain and simple. If we respected goodness and integrity and honor, if only we did that. When I was in Japan, in a host family in Tokyo, my Okasan was taken by Jimmy Carter. He was the president then. What she found so strange is that he would use the name Jimmy. Jimmy's a nickname. It's a child's name. And she'd tease me, say, "Oh, Jimmy Carter, Jimmy Carter." Because, in Japan, you're not going to use a child's name for a politician. Seems really stupid. What would they be saying in other countries today? I just want to tell you, all that time when I was preaching, and people said I was preaching about politics and Donald Trump, I want you to know it wasn't about politics. It is, but it isn't. It's about the lack of character, the total lack of compassion. Foreign countries are frightened of this man. And I would say, still, that he is the most dangerous thing in the world. Both Abraham and Sarah lack compassion, empathy, and caring. They don't even really see Hagar. She's a slave. And then we see Hagar do something absolutely unusual. She names God, the only woman in the Bible to give God a name. Elroy, the God who sees. People like Donald Trump don't see other people. He's a narcissist. Narcissists objectify everyone. No souls exist for narcissists. He cannot have compassion. Other people are not actually real to him unless they benefit him. That's a narcissist. This danger in the world is political, but it is at its foundation spiritual. And it's not just Donald Trump. It's a lot of people in America. I have a book entitled The Spiritual Danger of Donald Trump, written by evangelical Christians. Most of the people who are now criticizing Donald Trump are people who he appointed. If this story were the only story in Genesis, I would follow Hagar and her wild-ass Ishmael. This story serves as a witness in the Bible of reminding ourselves not being trustful of those in power, especially if they're not good people. Because the larger story in Genesis is about Abraham and Sarah, who are the ancestors of the Jewish people, this becomes a cautionary tale. Abraham and Sarah are, according to everybody, the heroes of the Bible. But who is the one who named God and said, God is the one who sees? The only time we hear Hagar again in the Bible is Paul in the letter to Galatians. He says this, "For it is written that Abraham had two sons, one by a slave woman and the other by a free woman. One, the child of a slave, was born according to the flesh. The other, a child of a free one, was born of God's promise." Do you see what he did with that story? He made Hagar the bad one and Isaac the good one. What this says is there's a lot of interpretation in the Bible, and sometimes it's really bad. This is how we have to read the Bible. The whole point is that it's a slave. The one who Paul says pejoratively is born of the flesh. It's a slave who's the good one. I believe we need to stop talking about who is saved and who isn't, who is strong and who isn't, and who is chosen and who isn't, and who's successful, wealthy, powerful, good-looking, and so on. And we need to start talking about people who are good and who is not. I view the woman who's cast in the wilderness and weeping, not wanting her child to die. She's the hero.